The landing bay hissed as the transport pod opened, spilling Tom Harris onto the polished floor of Clithera's central hub. He adjusted his worn jacket, squinting at the stark, silver walls and glowing panels. Everything was too clean, too perfect, no dirt, no mess, no life. He sniffed the air, sharp with a metallic bite, and muttered, "Guess this is home for now." A duffel bag swung over his shoulder as he stepped forward, boots echoing in the silence. A Clitheran official approached, her skin a shimmering silver blue, eyes like cold glass. She held a sleek device, scanning him without a word. "Thomas Harris, human engineer. Identity verified." "You are on schedule," she said, her voice flat as the walls around them. Tom grinned, brushing a hand through his sandy hair. "Call me Tom. And yeah, I try not to miss a gig, especially one across the galaxy." Shuttle was smooth, no space pirates this time. The official didn't blink. "Humor is irrelevant here. Follow the path to Sector 9, Unit 12. Your task begins at Cycle 06 tomorrow. Energy core maintenance. Tools are prepared." She turned away, already done with him. Tom shrugged. "Nice to meet you too," he called, but she was gone, gliding off with mechanical grace. He sighed and followed the glowing line on the floor, passing Clitherans who moved like clockwork, no chatter, no glances, just purpose. His quarters were a box, a bed, a desk, a single light. He dropped his bag and pulled out a faded photo of Earth, a beach, waves crashing, kids laughing. Sticking it to the wall, he smirked. "Let's add some soul to this place." The next morning, he trudged to the Energy Core facility, a towering structure pulsing with faint light. Clitheran stared as he whistled a tune, their silver faces unreadable. Counselor Vera met him at the entrance, tall and sharp-edged, her silver skin gleaming under the artificial sun. "Thomas Harris, your arrival is noted," she said, her tone crisp. "I oversee this project. The core's output has dropped 8%. Fix it." Tom nodded. "Tom's fine. And yeah, I'll get it humming. Got a coffee machine around here?" Vera tilted her head. "Stimulants are rationed. Work begins now." Tom chuckled. "Straight to it, huh? All right, lead the way." Inside, the core thrummed, a giant orb of light crisscrossed with conduits. Tom set down his toolkit, cracking his knuckles. Beautiful setup. Bit stiff, though, could use some flair. Vera watched him, her glass-like eyes narrowing. "Flair is inefficient. Focus on the task." He winked. "Efficiency's my middle name." "Well, not really, it's James, but you get me." She didn't reply, but her gaze lingered as he hummed and started tinkering. Hours later, Tom sat on the floor, tools scattered, tweaking a relay. "Come on, sweetheart, don't be shy," he muttered to the machine. Vera, passing by, stopped. "Why do you speak to it? It cannot respond." Tom looked up, grinning. "Old habit. Machines like a little love, makes them cooperate." She frowned. "Illogical. Cooperation is mechanical, not emotional." He shrugged. "Maybe. But it works. Watch this." He twisted a wire, and the core's hum grew steadier. Vera's device beeped, output up 2%. She stared. "Unorthodox. Explain." Tom wiped his hands. "Just a hunch. Humans don't always follow the manual." That night, alone in his quarters, Tom strummed an imaginary guitar, missing Earth's chaos. He didn't see Vera outside, lingering, her silver fingers tracing the doorframe. She'd never met anyone like him, sloppy, loud, alive. Something stirred in her, a flicker she couldn't name. Tomorrow, she'd ask more. For now, she walked away, the hum of the core echoing in her mind. Tom leaned against a conduit in the energy core facility, wiping sweat from his brow. The Clitheran sun, or whatever powered their artificial sky, beat down through the transparent ceiling, making the silver machinery gleam. He'd been at it for days, tweaking the core's relays, boosting its output bit by bit. The hum was steadier now, almost musical. He grinned, muttering, "That's my girl," as he patted the orb. A shadow fell over him, and he looked up to see Vera, her silver-blue skin catching the light like liquid metal. "Thomas Harris," she said, her voice sharp but tinged with something new, curiosity, maybe. "Your methods are irregular. The core's output has risen 5% beyond projections. Explain." Tom stood, brushing off his hands. "Just Tom, remember? And yeah, I tweaked a few things, rerouted some power flows, loosened up the regulators. Your specs were choking it." Vera's glass-like eyes narrowed. "That is not authorized. Modifications require council approval." Tom shrugged. "Back on Earth, we call it improvisation. Gets the job done faster." She stepped closer, her device flickering with data. "Improvisation introduces risk. Yet your results are undeniable. This is confusing." Tom chuckled. "Welcome to being human. We don't always play by the rules, sometimes we make better ones." Vera stared at him, then at the core. "Such actions are illegal here," she said, but she didn't call for guards. Instead, she lingered, watching as he adjusted another relay, humming a tune from an old Earth song. That night, Tom sat in his quarters, the photo of the beach glowing under the string lights he'd strung up. The door chimed, startling him. He opened it to find Vera, her silver tunic plain without her council badges. Hey," he said, stepping aside. "Didn't expect company." She entered, her movements stiff but deliberate. "I require clarification. Your methods defy logic, yet they succeed. I wish to understand, humans." Tom raised an eyebrow. "You sure? That's a big can of worms to open." She nodded. "I am certain. Privately. No records." He hesitated, then grinned. "All right, counselor. Pull up a chair, or, well, the bed, since that's all I've got." She sat, rigid as ever, while Tom rummaged in his duffel bag. He pulled out a small speaker and clicked it on. Soft guitar strums filled the room, an old folk song his dad used to play. Vera tilted her head. "What is this sound?" Tom sat across from her. "Music. Humans make it to feel stuff, happy, sad, whatever. No practical purpose, just life." She listened, her fingers twitching slightly. "It is inefficient," she said, but her voice softened. "Yet it stirs something." Tom smirked. "That's the point. Want to hear more?" She nodded, and he switched to a bouncy tune with a beat. Her foot tapped once, then stopped as if caught. "My body moved," she said, alarmed. Tom laughed. "That's rhythm. Totally normal. Try this." He stood, swaying to the music, arms loose. Vera watched, then stood too, mimicking him awkwardly. "This is foolish," she muttered, but her lips twitched, almost a smile. "Foolish is half the fun," Tom replied, spinning her gently. She stumbled, then steadied, her eyes wide. They sat again, breathless. "Why do humans do this?" she asked. Tom thought for a moment. "Because it's freedom. Rules are great, but sometimes you gotta break them to find something better." Vera looked at the speaker, then at him. "Breaking rules is illegal. Yet I feel lighter." Tom grinned. "That's step one. Next time, I'll show you something wilder." She stood to leave, pausing at the door. "Tomorrow, after cycle's end. I will return." Then she was gone, leaving Tom staring at the empty space, heart racing. The next day, he worked the core with extra swagger, knowing she'd be watching. By night, she was back, and Tom pulled out a deck of cards. "Ever played a game?" he asked. She shook her head. "Clitherans do not waste time." He shuffled the deck. "This isn't waste, it's strategy. Watch." He taught her a simple game, laughing as she won the first round with pure logic. "You're a natural," he said. She almost smiled again. "This is engaging." Outside, a patrol drone buzzed past, but inside, the room felt alive. Vera left that night with a promise to return, her silver face glowing faintly, not from the lights, but from something new waking up inside her. Tom leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "What am I starting here?" he wondered aloud. Whatever it was too late to stop. Tom's quarters pulsed with energy, the string lights flickering as a fast disco beat thumped from his speaker. He spun Vera in the cramped space, her silver hair whipping as she laughed, a sound that had gone from rare to regular over the past weeks. She'd traded her stiff tunic for a loose shirt Tom had lent her, its faded Earth logo clashing with her shimmering skin. "This move's called the dip," he shouted over the music, guiding her backward. She stumbled, giggling as he caught her, their faces inches apart. For a moment, they froze, breaths mixing, the air electric. "Humans do this for fun?" she asked, voice soft but bright. Tom grinned, pulling her upright. "All the time. Keeps the blood pumping." She tilted her head, glass-like eyes glinting. "It is exhilarating." They danced on, the room a blur of motion and sound, until a sharp crack shattered the rhythm. The door exploded inward, shards flying, and 6 Clitheran enforcers stormed in, their sleek weapons glowing with menace. Tom shoved Vera behind him, heart pounding. "Whoa, easy. What's this about?" The lead enforcer, a towering figure with a face like polished steel, pointed at him. "Thomas Harris, you are detained for cultural disruption and corruption of a counselor." 2 grabbed his arms, energy binders snapping tight around his wrists. Vera stepped forward, silver skin flushed. "Stop. I chose this. He didn't force me." The enforcers ignored her, dragging Tom toward the door. A new figure entered, taller, broader, his silver blue skin marked with intricate lines. "Kale," Vera whispered, her voice trembling. Her brother, head of the council's enforcement wing, surveyed the room with cold fury. The music still blared, the lights blinked, a half-eaten bowl of ice cream sat melting on the desk. "Vera," he said, his tone icy, "you disgrace us. This human has poisoned you." He gestured, and 2 more enforcers seized her, though gentler than with Tom. "Poisoned?" Tom snapped, struggling against the binders. "She's happier than she's ever been. Look at her." Kale's eyes flicked to Vera, then back to Tom. "Happiness is irrelevant. Order is paramount. You face exile, or worse." Vera pulled free, standing tall. "No, Kale. I learned from him. Humans thrive because they feel, not despite it. We've forgotten that." Kale's face hardened. "You're compromised. Medical recalibration will fix you." Tom's stomach dropped. "Recalibration? You mean brainwashing?" Kale didn't answer, nodding to the enforcers. "Take him to detention. Full isolation." As they hauled Tom out, he caught Vera's gaze, her eyes fierce, promising something. "Don't let M win," he yelled before a stun pulse hit his side, and darkness swallowed him. He woke in a cell, a stark cube with glowing blue walls and no sound but his own breathing. His head throbbed, his wrists ached from the binders, now gone. "Nice hospitality," he muttered, sitting up on the hard platform. How long had he been out? Hours? Days? No way to tell. His thoughts raced to Vera. What were they doing to her? He punched the wall, the dull thud echoing. Gotta get out of here. Meanwhile, Vera sat in a medical bay, strapped to a chair, a device humming above her head. Kale stood nearby, arms crossed. This will restore you, he said. A technician adjusted the machine, and a low buzz filled her skull, dulling her thoughts. She clenched her fists, fighting it, picturing Tom's grin, the taste of ice cream, the beat of the music. No, she whispered, then louder, no. The technician paused, glancing at Kale. Increase the dose, he ordered. But Vera's mind clung to the spark Tom had lit, she wouldn't let it fade. Back in his cell, Tom paced, mind racing. He'd faced worse, pirate raids, engine failures mid-flight. Think, Harris, he growled. The walls were seamless, but the light panels flickered slightly. Power flow. If he could overload it. He pried at the sleeping platform, finding a loose edge. With effort, he yanked it free, exposing a thin conduit. Bingo, he muttered, digging into his pocket for a multi-tool he'd hidden. Time to improvise. Outside, rumors spread. Workers whispered about the counselor dancing with the human, about strange sounds from Sector 9. Kale tightened security, but the cracks were forming. Tom and Vera's rebellion, small as it was, had planted a seed, and it was growing. Tom's quarters pulsed with energy, the string lights flickering as a fast disco beat thumped from his speaker. He spun Vera in the cramped space, her silver hair whipping as she laughed, a sound that had gone from rare to regular over the past weeks. She'd traded her stiff tunic for a loose shirt Tom had lent her, its faded Earth logo clashing with her shimmering skin. This move's called the dip, he shouted over the music, guiding her backward. She stumbled, giggling as he caught her, their faces inches apart. For a moment, they froze, breaths mixing, the air electric. Humans do this for fun? She asked, voice soft but bright. Tom grinned, pulling her upright. All the time. Keeps the blood pumping. She tilted her head, glass-like eyes glinting. It is exhilarating. They danced on, the room a blur of motion and sound, until a sharp crack shattered the rhythm. The door exploded inward, shards flying, and 6 Clitheran enforcers stormed in, their sleek weapons glowing with menace. Tom shoved Vera behind him, heart pounding. Whoa, easy. What's this about? The lead enforcer, a towering figure with a face like polished steel, pointed at him. Thomas Harris, you are detained for cultural disruption and corruption of a counselor. 2 grabbed his arms, energy binders snapping tight around his wrists. Vera stepped forward, silver skin flushed. Stop. I chose this. He didn't force me. The enforcers ignored her, dragging Tom toward the door. A new figure entered, taller, broader, his silver blue skin marked with intricate lines. Kale, Vera whispered, her voice trembling. Her brother, head of the council's enforcement wing, surveyed the room with cold fury. The music still blared, the lights blinked, a half-eaten bowl of ice cream sat melting on the desk. Vera, he said, his tone icy, you disgrace us. This human has poisoned you. He gestured, and 2 more enforcers seized her, though gentler than with Tom. Poisoned? Tom snapped, struggling against the binders. She's happier than she's ever been. Look at her. Kale's eyes flicked to Vera, then back to Tom. Happiness is irrelevant. Order is paramount. You face exile, or worse. Vera pulled free, standing tall. No, Kale. I learned from him. Humans thrive because they feel, not despite it. We've forgotten that. Kale's face hardened. You're compromised. Medical recalibration will fix you. Tom's stomach dropped. Recalibration? You mean brainwashing? Kale didn't answer, nodding to the enforcers. Take him to detention. Full isolation. As they hauled Tom out, he caught Vera's gaze, her eyes fierce, promising something. "Don't let M win," he yelled before a stun pulse hit his side, and darkness swallowed him. He woke in a cell, a stark cube with glowing blue walls and no sound but his own breathing. His head throbbed, his wrists ached from the binders, now gone. "Nice hospitality," he muttered, sitting up on the hard platform. How long had he been out? Hours? Days? No way to tell. His thoughts raced to Vera. What were they doing to her? He punched the wall, the dull thud echoing. Gotta get out of here. Meanwhile, Vera sat in a medical bay, strapped to a chair, a device humming above her head. Kale stood nearby, arms crossed. "This will restore you," he said. A technician adjusted the machine, and a low buzz filled her skull, dulling her thoughts. She clenched her fists, fighting it, picturing Tom's grin, the taste of ice cream, the beat of the music. "No," she whispered, then louder, "No." The technician paused, glancing at Kale. "Increase the dose," he ordered. But Vera's mind clung to the spark Tom had lit, she wouldn't let it fade. Back in his cell, Tom paced, mind racing. He'd faced worse, pirate raids, engine failures mid-flight. "Think, Harris," he growled. The walls were seamless, but the light panels flickered slightly. Power flow. If he could overload it. He pried at the sleeping platform, finding a loose edge. With effort, he yanked it free, exposing a thin conduit. "Bingo," he muttered, digging into his pocket for a multi-tool he'd hidden. Time to improvise. Outside, rumors spread. Workers whispered about the counselor dancing with the human, about strange sounds from Sector 9. Kale tightened security, but the cracks were forming. Tom and Vera's rebellion, small as it was, had planted a seed, and it was growing. Tom stood in the center of the tribunal chamber, a vast dome with silver walls that curved like a giant eye watching him. His hands were bound again, energy binders humming faintly, but he kept his chin up. 7 counselors sat above him on high seats, their silver-blue faces stern under the harsh light. Kale occupied the central throne, his intricate markings glowing with authority. The observation gallery buzzed with Clitherans, their glass-like eyes fixed on Tom, some curious, some disgusted. He smirked despite the ache in his ribs. "Nice crowd. Hope they brought popcorn." The tribunal moderator's voice echoed, cold and mechanical. "Thomas Harris, you face charges of cultural disruption, sensory corruption, and endangering Clitheran order. Penalties include neural recalibration and exile. Do you understand?" Tom nodded. "Yeah, I get it. You don't like my dance moves." Kale leaned forward, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "Your actions threaten our way of life. Evidence will be presented." Holograms flared to life around the chamber, clips of Tom and Vera laughing, dancing, sharing ice cream. The final image froze on Vera tossing the ball, her face alight with joy. Gasps rippled through the gallery. "Deny this," Kale demanded. Tom met his gaze. "Nope. It's all true. But it's not corruption, it's living. You've got a whole planet of robots here, and I just showed her there's more." A counselor scoffed. "Primitive chaos. Clithera thrives on discipline." Tom shrugged. "Discipline's great, but joy makes us stronger. Ask Vera." Kale's eyes darkened. "She is being corrected. Her lapse is temporary." Tom's heart sank, but he hid it. "Corrected, huh? Where is she then? Let her speak." Kale ignored him, nodding to the moderator. "Proceed with sentencing." Before the words could finish, the chamber doors slammed open, and Vera strode in. The gallery erupted in whispers. She wore a bright red shirt, Tom's, over her tunic, her silver hair loose. In her hands, she carried a bowl. Vera. Cale roared, rising. You were confined. She stopped beside Tom, unflinching. I declined treatment. Statute 42 allows me that right unless I'm impaired. Am I? She turned to the council, voice steady. I bring evidence, not of crime, but of truth. Cale's face twisted. You're corrupted. Vera smiled, a real, human smile. No. I'm awake. She lifted the bowl, ice cream, and scooped a spoonful, eating it slowly. Her eyes closed, savoring it, and the chamber fell silent. This is what Tom shared, she said, opening her eyes. Not chaos, but possibility. She activated a device on her wrist, and holograms bloomed, ancient Clitheran art of dancing, feasting, laughing. Our ancestors knew this. We lost it to efficiency. But look, another hologram showed data, innovation rates dropping 50% since the ban on joy. We're not thriving. We're fading. The counselors shifted, uneasy. Cale slammed a fist on his throne. This is sedition. Vera ignored him, wheeling in a cart with bowls of ice cream. Try it, she challenged. Judge for yourselves. The youngest counselor, a woman with softer features, reached first. Evidence must be tested, she said, tasting it. Her eyes widened, a small O escaping. One by one, others followed, hesitant, then awed. Smiles crept onto silver faces, unfamiliar but real. Cale refused, his bowl untouched. This proves nothing, he snapped. Tom grinned at Vera. Proves plenty. Look at M. The counselor who tasted first spoke. It's extraordinary. Could our laws be wrong? Cale glared. Impossible. But doubt flickered in his eyes as his peers murmured, licking spoons clean. Vera stepped closer to Cale. Brother, remember the stories grandfather told, about festivals, songs? We weren't weak then. Tom didn't corrupt me, he reminded me. She offered her bowl. Taste it. Not as a counselor, as my brother. Cale stared, rigid, then took the spoon. The chamber held its breath. He ate, his face still for a moment, then softening, just a little. Acceptable, he muttered, the closest he'd come to admitting defeat. The moderator cleared their throat. We recessed to deliberate. As the council filed out, Tom nudged Vera. You're a badass. How'd you escape? She smirked. Their relaxant backfired, made me stubborn instead of compliant. He laughed. That's my girl. The fight wasn't over, but the tide was turning. Tom crouched in the shadows of his cell, the faint blue glow of the walls pulsing like a heartbeat. The loose conduit he'd pried open sparked as he worked his multi-tool into it, sweat beading on his forehead. Come on, baby, give me something, he muttered. A jolt ran through the wire, and the lights flickered wildly. He grinned, overloaded. The cell door hissed, unlocking for a split second. He shoved it open and slipped into the corridor, pulse racing. Time to find Vera. Outside the tribunal chamber, chaos brewed. The council's recess stretched on, their voices leaking through the walls, sharp debates over ice cream and ancient art. In the streets, Clitherans whispered about the human and the counselor's daughter. Some clutched forbidden tunes they'd heard, humming off-key. Vera's stunt had cracked their perfect order, and Tom's escape would shatter it. He dodged patrols, sticking to maintenance tunnels he'd memorized from the core job. His jacket snagged on a pipe, but he kept moving, driven by one thought, Vera. She'd stood up to Cale, now he'd back her up. He found her in a holding bay, strapped to a medical chair, the neural device dormant above her. Her eyes lit up as he burst in. Tom. He yanked the straps free, grinning. Miss me? She stood, shaky but fierce. Always. They didn't have time to plan. Alarms blared, his escape was noticed. "We need to move," Vera said, grabbing his hand. She led him through back routes, her council knowledge guiding them to an abandoned plaza. Old murals loomed on the walls, Clitherans laughing, dancing, free. "This is our past," she said. "Let's make it our future." Tom nodded, pulling his speaker from his pocket. "Let's wake em up." He cranked the volume, a thumping Earth anthem echoing across the plaza. Heads poked from buildings, silver faces curious. Vera climbed a broken fountain, shouting, "Clithera! We've lived in silence too long. Feel something, join us." Tom tossed her the ball, and she caught it, laughing. A few Clitherans edged closer, hesitant. One, a young worker, took the ball, tossing it back. Then another joined, then 10. Laughter rang out, clumsy but real. Kale's enforcers arrived, weapons raised. "Disperse," their leader barked. But the crowd grew, humming Tom's tune. Vera jumped down, facing them. "You can't stop this. We're alive again." A guard wavered, lowering his gun. "I tasted the ice cream," he admitted. The others stared, then one chuckled, a sound so alien it stunned them all. The line broke, some joining the crowd, others retreating. Kale stormed in, his face a mask of rage. "Vera! You betray us." She met his gaze. "No, I'm saving us. Look around." Clitherans danced now, awkward but eager, passing the ball, singing off-key. Tom stepped up. "You can lock me up, but you can't lock this up. It's out." Kale's hand twitched toward his weapon, but the crowd pressed closer, unafraid. He faltered, outnumbered by their joy. The council emerged, drawn by the noise. The young counselor who'd tasted first smiled faintly. "This is unprecedented," she said. Others nodded, some tapping their feet. Kale spun on them. "You condone this?" The eldest counselor spoke. "We deliberate still, but perhaps efficiency isn't all." Kale's jaw tightened, but he couldn't fight the tide. Tom and Vera stood together, the plaza alive around them. He handed her the speaker. "Your turn." She blasted a new song, pulling him into a dance. The crowd cheered, silver hands clapping, a sound Clithera hadn't heard in centuries. Patrols circled, but none dared stop it. The revolution wasn't just theirs anymore, it belonged to everyone. By dawn, the plaza overflowed. Clitherans brought makeshift instruments, pipes, crates, joining the beat. Vera leaned into Tom, breathless. "This is freedom." He grinned. "Told you fun's contagious." Kale watched from the edge, silent, his world unraveling. The council reconvened atop a platform, their verdict looming. But whatever they decided, the spark was lit, Clithera would never be the same. The plaza thrummed with life as dawn broke over Clithera, the artificial sky shifting to a soft gold. Tom stood amid the chaos, his speaker blasting a slow, triumphant tune, an old earth ballad about rising again. Clitherans swayed to it, their silver skin catching the light as they clapped, laughed, and tossed the battered ball back and forth. Vera danced beside him, her movements fluid now, no trace of the rigid counselor she'd been. The crowd had swelled overnight, workers, families, even a few enforcers who ditched their weapons to join in. The air buzzed with something new, hope. Kale lingered at the plaza's edge, his silver-blue face unreadable. His enforcers flanked him, but their grips on their guns were loose, eyes darting to the celebration. The council stood atop a platform, their deliberation finished. The young counselor stepped forward, her voice cutting through the noise. "Clithera has decided," she said, pausing as the music faded. Tom squeezed Vera's hand. "Here we go," he whispered. "Thomas Harris," she continued, "your actions broke our laws. But they also broke our silence. We've reviewed the data, innovation, creativity, even strength, they thrive where joy lives. We vote 4-3, no exile, no recalibration. You stay. The crowd erupted, cheers drowning her next words. Tom grinned, pumping a fist. Guess I'm not fired. Vera laughed, pulling him into a spin. You're more than that now. Cale stepped forward, silencing the noise with a raised hand. This is folly, he said, voice tight. Efficiency built us. You'll ruin it. The eldest counselor responded, spoon still in hand from the ice cream vote. No, Cale. We stagnated. Look at them. He pointed to the crowd, Clitherans teaching each other to dance, sharing makeshift drums. This is progress. Cale's jaw clenched, but he didn't argue. He turned away, vanishing into the shadows with a handful of loyalists. The counselor addressed the crowd. We amend our laws. Fun, expression, is no longer illegal. We blend it with our ways, guided by the human in Vera. She nodded to them. Tom smirked. Guess we're consultants now. Vera's eyes gleamed. Partners. They faced the crowd, who chanted their names, Tom's rough earth accent mingling with Vera's sharp Clitheran tones. It sounded right. Days blurred into weeks. Tom worked the core again, but now Clitherans joined him, asking about earth tricks, some even whistled while they tinkered. Vera organized gatherings, music nights, game days, teaching her people to feel without fear. The plaza became a hub, murals repainted with fresh colors, old songs rediscovered. Production rose, not from force but from spirit. Tom rigged a coffee maker from spare parts, sharing bitter brews that made Vera wince then smile. Still terrible, she teased. Still worth it, he shot back. One night, under the glowing sky, they sat on the fountain's edge, the crowd thinning. Vera held a new bowl of ice cream, chocolate this time, smuggled from a trade ship. She took a bite, eyes closing in bliss. This is better, she said. Tom laughed. Told you. What's next? She looked at him, silver skin warm against his arm. More. Music, stories, maybe, travel. Earth? He raised an eyebrow. You'd survive my planet? She smirked. I'd thrive. The speaker hummed a soft tune, and they danced again, slow, close, the world theirs. Clithera wasn't perfect yet, pockets of resistance lingered, Cale's shadow loomed. But the seed had taken root. Tom glanced at the stars. This could spread, other planets, other fights. Vera nodded. It will. With us. The music swelled, and the crowd joined, a ripple of joy stretching beyond the plaza. The story didn't end, it couldn't. Clithera was alive, messy, growing. Tom and Vera stood at its heart, ready for whatever came next. The galaxy waited, and all it took was a yes to keep going. The beat played on, inviting anyone listening to step in and dream.